Welcome to the Vocation of the Business Leader podcast. I'm Greg Balster. Here we explore how Catholic leaders let Christ and the teachings of the church he founded guide their work, integrating faith and business. Each episode offers inspiring stories to help you live an undivided life. Thanks for joining us. Let's meet our guest, Jeff Schiefelbein.
Hey, Greg, how you doing? Is the intro of your show always say that last part about inspired to live an undivided life?
Yeah.
Yeah. You and I were meant to be on this podcast together.
Man, I didn't know about Scent. When I thought of this podcast, I didn't know about you. And then when I found it, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. This is like hit a pot of gold,
Well, that's exactly how I felt the very first time I read The Vocation of the Business Leader.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a treasure that I had maybe vaguely heard about, but never knew that anybody had put all the pieces together. And I couldn't believe that somebody was putting words to the thoughts and realities that I've been experiencing for, over a decade.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure, happy to. I think the most important things to tell you is that, number one, my priorities are that my faith and love for Jesus Christ comes before my wife before my 7 kids, my 7 kids before everything else. So I'm the frustrating guy at a dinner party that won't ever answer when people say, "What do you do?" I know what they really are asking me is, how do you make money? But what the question leads me into all sorts of conversations around the vocation of being a father and a husband, and then eventually a business leader. So, yes, living in Coppell, Texas, which is just north of DFW, and working here in Irving, I jokingly call where we are the Vatican Valley. I'm surrounded by amazing Catholic leaders, both in the for-profit, nonprofit, and even the education space. And I'm somebody who I think really found a way to line up the work and the effort I put in every day with the talents and gifts that God gave me, and then go through all those iterations of work and formation so that I'm using them to the best of my abilities and still learning as I go. So I'm one of those guys that I think I'm fully in flow, and the business I've been running for 2 years is called Undivided Life.
Yeah. So before we get to there, so you went to A&M.
I did.
Yeah, that's a great school. I thought about, I went to Stephen F. Austin, and I
love Stephen F. Austin.
It was between A&M and Stephen F., and I grew up in a small town. There was 19, Chillicothe.
Oh, I've seen it. I don't think I've driven through it, but I've seen it on the map.
Yeah.
It looks like I would say it differently than you just said it.
Yeah. It's, I had 19 in my graduating class, and going from that to A&M, which was probably 43,000 at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know if I can handle that. So I went to Stephen F., and it's like 12,000.
What high school year are you, real quick? When did
86.
You get 86. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We're separated by 10 years there, but you look younger than me. So one of us has got something going on here.
Yeah. I'm an old man. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What's interesting, I grew up in a 3A high school, so not small, but only maybe 2 other people from my school selected Texas A&M, which blew me away. I was on the northwest side of Fort Worth. It just seemed like you would have had more than that go out of a graduating class of over 300. But I went there for a couple of reasons, namely that all of my siblings, I'm the youngest of 4, had, starting with my oldest sister when we first moved to Texas, she was starting high school, all of them had selected A&M. And I found this place that even as a 10-year-old boy or a 12-year-old boy, I felt like I was treated with respect, which blew me away because I did other college tours with my sisters, or, got a chance to visit other cities where I was a nobody. And there was something pretty special about making this big 43,000 person campus feel like you might actually be somebody and you could find your people within that giant organization. So,
yeah, absolutely. So while you're there, situation happened, and you established this Carpool, which is an amazing organization. Tell us about Carpool, and also before that. So it took a lot of initiative. So did your parents instill this entrepreneurial spirit in you?
Okay, yeah. So let's go way back. I've always admired that my parents were both folks who always wanted to be involved. They didn't want to just sit back and let other things happen. They wanted to be part of the cause of things happening. So even when I was just, a 2-year-old, 3-year-old little boy, they were running the parent teacher association, the local civic clubs. They were really kind of hands-on and instrumental in anything from getting a pool put in our neighborhood in Virginia to getting the blinking red lights and the warning signs near the high school for people to slow down in the school zone. And this was back in the 80s. That wasn't a primary thing back then. I watched my dad go through a buyout from Burlington Northern when they merged with Santa Fe. And after a year-long journey, he determined that he was going to become a consultant in the transportation world. And so from scratch, he built an organization and started taking on clients. And he did that for the rest of his career. And so I don't think of my dad as an entrepreneur per se. I think he kind of found his way in a life stage where it was necessary, and then he made it work, and he was able to put the rest of us through college. He was able to live a great lifestyle, and now is retired. So I would say my parents, if you took both of their personalities, you'd probably have an entrepreneur. It's like intellect and drive met with emotional IQ and a desire just to cause things to happen. And so, yes, they were a big part of this. When I started at Texas A&M, here I was, the fourth kid in a row. We all overlapped. I was supposed to be the pride of the family because I had more college credits than any of my brothers or sisters going in. But I was also the youngest, so I was the most likely to get in trouble, is a nice way to say that. Starting my sophomore year, I was arrested one night, got pulled over for speeding, but had been drinking and was intoxicated. So I received a DWI that night. And Greg, I was guilty of the crime. And so as part of that moment, outside of the shame of having to tell my family when I got out of jail what I had done, thanks be to God not having been in an accident, I also pled guilty as soon as I could to the crime. I was guilty and I wanted the consequences. I'll share that with you because as part of my punishment, I went to a Mothers Against Drunk Driving victim impact panel. Listened to this mom speak about the death of her daughter, and God hit me with a lightning bolt that night. It was as I was contemplating what's the difference between the guy who killed her and me, and I couldn't come up with a single difference other than I was here. And then I saw this 20-year vision that something had to be different. At that point, I'd already been pretty involved at A&M. I had run a fundraiser for United Way on campus for a karaoke contest. I had helped to launch this student handbook for freshmen of all the non-technical things, like where's a great place to study off campus to have coffee, or the different church things you could go to throughout the week. So I was entrepreneurial already, but something hit me and said, okay, if I took my personality, the drive that says there's got to be a better way, and I galvanized the troops, we could really make a dent in this thing. We could make responsible decision-making the cool thing to do and give people a true, honest option that they would feel comfortable using rather than driving drunk like I had at, as a young invincible kid. And so what we put together, Carpool, Caring Aggies Are Protecting Over Our Lives, is one of the most robust, difficult, and in fact, I'm going to use a word here, impossible organizations to launch. And in the time it took from concept to launch was the most difficult year of my life, physically, mentally, emotionally. And now the organization is 25 years old, and over 300,000 people have used that program to get a free, non-judgmental, student-run drive home from their peers so they can go on and live out their dreams the next day or not put anybody else in danger. So it's been a huge, huge success, and was from the very first day that we launched it.
Awesome. That's amazing. Were you bold in your faith in college?
No, I wasn't. I was bold that someday I would be bold in my faith.
I was about to, like in Texas, you say, I'm fixing to be bold.
Fixing to be bold, yeah. You know what my version was? I thought the Catholic faith was beautiful. I didn't want to put too much energy into it because I knew that someday I would be a 65-year-old usher, that I would get a maroon blazer and I would open the door. I might even, do the readings, but that I didn't want to go too fast because I knew where I was going to end up. And it was a bad move. I mean, obviously God had a plan and all that, because I got to try my hand at various levels of fame, and I can tell you that, various levels of notoriety or power or money or whatever. And I found them all to be so, so empty. Even like the sport of the dating world and, the thrill of being around beautiful women was so empty that it felt so meaningless. And what was wild to me is I continued in my faith. I just wasn't living it to the standard that I should be or that I was called to be as a man and as really a son of Christ. But every time I went to the sacraments, or especially if I got involved in a small group or retreat, maybe a Bible study that would be studying the readings for this upcoming Sunday, there was all these little nuggets that they satisfied. They stayed with me. I went through the Christ Renews Parish Retreat. I went to the Holy Land with my father and the deacon from our church and a few other people. All these times that I invested in understanding the Word of God, understanding the teachings of the church, being in real prayer, man, that stuff stayed with me. And I realized I want more of that and less of this emptiness. And by this weird practical knowledge or just kind of like a natural law principle, I gravitated to the thing I wanted more of. And it's funny, the more you learn and the more you kind of cross over that divide from being passive to active, the more you can never going back to being stupid, like an ignorant Catholic. But at the same time, you realize how far away you really are. And so it becomes, how do I keep dialing it in? And you hear this from saints all the time, like the closer they were to sainthood, the further they felt because they realized how much more they were letting urges and worldly things get in the way of who they were called to be.
So speaking of beautiful women, so how did you meet your wife?
Gosh, you want to hear a crazy story? So I started Carpool in 1999. Within 6 months, I was known throughout all of at least College Station, Texas, right? Which sounds small, but 60,000 students at that point and who knows how many people in the community. So I became a local celebrity and I was guest lecturing for college classes. I was giving talks. I was on radio and TV, and that kind of trajectory continued. I was talking nonstop on stages after I graduated, went and had a career, ended up in Dallas, ended up in energy. And in 2008, so now here I'm out of school 7 or 8 years, they ended up surprising me after I gave a lecture in town, and they named one of their freshman orientation camps after me. So they call it Fish Camp. But there was a fish camp named Camp Schiefelbein, and it was Session E Yellow Camp 2008. 25 counselors get assigned to Camp Schiefelbein, and then months later, 150 freshmen come through that camp. And as a namesake, I get the chance to be involved in anything with the counselors or also get to be at the actual camp. And so it was fascinating because I would say that most people who get to be a namesake are somehow related to the university on an ongoing basis, maybe a dignitary. And here I was, a young executive in Dallas, I have my own camp. And if I went down and had a nice baseball game with my counselors way before camp started, and turned and saw this shy young woman kind of head bobbing to one of the walk-up songs for the baseball player. And Greg, I had this crush on her it hit me instantly. And I said to myself, that crush will go away. There's no way it's going to stay, right? It's just a crush. And it never did. And so 6 months later, I explained to her that I felt very called to marry her and that we should probably start dating. And I waited till that camp was done. And I said, look, if we're going to start dating, stop wearing stuff that says Schiefelbein on your bracelet or on your shirt. I said, that makes me look possessive. And so to tell you the scandal, I had turned 30 and she was 19. She was starting her sophomore year at A&M. And I was an executive and she was just some student in school, and she was a bit of a wallflower. But we both knew on our first date that we were called to something greater. So we talked about having a life of faith. We talked about, and we had to figure out what that meant, but it was important. We talked about naming our first daughter. So we named her Lorelei on that first date. And then last but not least, we said, look, someday we're going to have a really large family. One way or another, God willing, we'll have a large family. And the people that are about to talk bad about us, which they did, we won't even remember their names or the details of what they said, because that's not what life is about. That's people getting wrapped up in the here and now and the gossip. So let's just have the fortitude and courage to go forward in this. And now I got 7 kids. The oldest turns 11 in November. And I can't remember the names of the people that talked bad about us, but I can tell you that we were built the domestic church in our home. And my wife is my hero. And she's a convert to the faith, which is another beautiful part of that story.
Wow. Yeah.
The first time she stepped foot in a Catholic church was while we were dating. And it took her breath away to be a part of something bigger than the moment and bigger than, the pastor or whatever they felt like talking about that day. And she was so intrigued by this meaningfulness that she went on her own journey. And without telling me, she asked my father to be her RCIA sponsor before we were even engaged.
Wow.
Now, he lived in Fort Worth. She's in College Station. He would drive 3 hours every Tuesday, take her to dinner, RCIA. He'd sleep in a hotel, and then he'd come back the next morning. And so their relationship grew very strong. In the middle of that, we got engaged. And as soon as she finished, having her moment of confirmation at the Easter Vigil, 3 weeks later, we were in the Holy Land with both my parents for my second visit back on pilgrimage. And it's been a beautiful, beautiful thing to witness how strong her faith and her devotion is.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
that's
not
awesome.
A typical way to meet your wife, though. I can tell you, most people don't get a camp to pick from. That's pretty wild.
I will pick you and you.
It makes me look crazy. I'm glad it worked.
Yeah. So tell us about your kids.
Yeah, I've got 7 beautiful children. Lorelai, you just heard about, is the absolute mini-me of all of them. She actually acts and has the confidence that I had in college. So it's a bit of that mirror that you get to see what's good and bad, or even the triggers that set her off are my exact triggers. So you have this feeling of like, am I still a kid? Am I still battling through the triggers of my youth? What's cool is right after she came, our second one is a girl who ended up being my wife's mini-me. More of an introvert, more of a soulful, deep thinker, old soul, and got the most gentle touch and care for others. And that reminds me of my wife in a big way. And since we had one of each, a mini-me and a mini-her, we figured why not keep going and see what else comes. And we ended up with 3 boys, a little girl, and then another boy. So we got 4 total boys, 3 total girls. What's interesting is they're all so tightly packed. The furthest gap between any of them is 2 years. And I share that because, if you have a big gap between, let's say, a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old, it can feel big.
Right.
But if in between you have kids stacked, sequentially, it almost makes them closer because there's a thread that kind of binds them together. So I can watch my 6 oldest kids play together. Last night, they were all playing Legos upstairs in one of the rooms. And even the 2-year-old is just right there in the middle of it, playing zoo, playing Legos. And the only one who's not a part of it is just learning to crawl this week. His name's Eustace, and he's 9 months old. I got to tell you, I've got some miracle kids. I'm a very emotional mass goer because I truly believe in the power and presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And so I don't take it lightly. But I have a lot of kids, so they're climbing all over me all the time. Yesterday was the anniversary of my son's baptism completion 5 years ago, which means he was baptized in a hospital room when they told us to say goodbye to him. And then months later, we were able to do a completion ceremony with his godparents present. But my son's lungs, Ambrose, his lungs were never opened when he was born. And it wasn't until we sent out a message asking the world to pray for him and people of faith to come together that the next x-ray, about 32 hours into his life, his lungs had expanded while he was already put on fentanyl, dopamine. He was sedated and paralyzed because the doctors said, look, if his lungs don't open, the machines are going to kill him or he's just going to die naturally. And they had him sedated. They were draining his side because they had torn open the ends of his lungs. We were at the end of life when my wife finally got to meet him in the middle of the night. And it was the saddest, hardest kind of walk and moment of my life. But our prayer, this is really important, our prayer on the way there, no matter how sad or hurt we felt, was thy will be done. Like there's a plan and we don't have to understand it for it to be true. And I will tell you that was a moment of understanding what it means to accept God's will. And that's a very clear line in my life. Fast forward to this year, 2024, when my 3-year-old got hit in the back of the head by a golf club. And at the emergency room for a concussion, they found a tumor on a different part of his brain operated the next day. And that tumor took him a few weeks to diagnose, but ended up being a very severe and rare brain cancer. And so my son, Benedict, launched into a fight for his life that included 33 days of proton radiation treatment, being sedated every single day, Monday through Friday for 2 months, and all the other kids having to kind of muscle through while mom was taking care of Benedict. I'm trying to, take care of myself and those kids. And it was one of the hardest struggles of my life. What's interesting is the kid who hit him with the golf club was Ambrose. Ambrose, whose life was saved 5 years earlier when medicine kept him alive for day 1, but prayer caused him to live for day 2 and beyond. I truly believe that part of Ambrose's life story was to hit his brother with a golf club on accident and cause us to find this. But remember, I told you that we were accepting God's will. We now have grown, and thanks be to God for this documentary about a young priest in Houston by the same title, but now we love God's will. And I think loving God's will is this place of outrageous freedom, because that doesn't take away sadness. It doesn't take away pain. It doesn't take away fear. But I used to tell people I don't barter with God, and I don't say why me or if you only. I just accept God's will. Now I go past that to, God, if it's your will that Benedict at 3 years old should have brain cancer, thank you. Thank you for allowing Benedict to be in that role. Thank you for us getting the chance to be his parents in this time. I want to blow your mind with something.
Okay.
As if this isn't enough already. Right now, well, let me tell you the backup. We moved into a new house this year. We had a baby born at the end of January. 7 days later, we moved to a new house.
Oh.
And this house has a giant acreage in the back. There's nobody behind us. And I really couldn't get this house because I had started a new business. I didn't have a normal W-2 income. But on Christmas Eve, a Catholic friend of mine who's very successful called and said that the Holy Spirit said, I need to call you because we need to get you in this house because it's going to bless your family and it's going to bless the community. And I have one of those homes that you would probably host events at, and bring people together. So I kept thinking, yeah, of course it's going to bless everybody. And then he did some really cool things on his side to make sure that we found a way to get into this house even without the ability to qualify for a mortgage. Well, had it not been for this house and the move, we wouldn't have the golf club sitting out, and I would have never let my daughter tee off into the backyards, into some woods. And then Ambrose picks up the golf club, hits Benny, and you know the story.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to my friend again months later, and I thought about how much in his whole life arc, starting at 40 years old, he just listens to whatever the Holy Spirit tells him to do.
Yeah.
And he blessed my family by saving Benedict's life. And he blessed the community by allowing people of faith to walk through this journey with us as we've faced, our biggest fears, the loss of a child, or saying goodbye to a kid, or going through brain cancer. And all I can tell you is I love God's will, and I'm trying every day to live up to this, with every breath, that I'll praise and glorify Jesus Christ and honor God by being the best version of myself in my work, in my home, in my church, and being undivided in every one of those.
Oh. Wow. Yeah. That's amazing.
It's a lot.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. So,
hey, Greg, right now, Benedict has no evidence of disease in his brain. I just want you to hear this part for your listeners too. He finished up radiation. They canceled his chemo because they thought that it probably wasn't going to make a big difference with the type of cancer that it is.
Yeah.
And when they did all the follow-up tests, he still has quote unquote brain cancer, but is currently in a state of no evidence of disease. So we're going to be on a pattern of every 3 months, he gets a pretty long 3-hour MRI to be checked. But Benedict's at pre-K 3 across the street at the same school as his 4 older siblings, loving his new friends and hanging out with his pre-K teachers, and living a 3-year-old life that he has no idea what happened to him.
Praise the Lord. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're grateful.
Yeah. Because brain cancer, there's no pain receptors up there. So there's no way of feeling it.
Yeah. You just have symptoms.
Yeah.
You have seizures, or you have vomiting, or you have whatever, symptoms.
Yeah.
And there's only 5 cases in the world that are somewhat similar to this that have been documented. And they were all found because of symptoms, not because of an accidental find like this.
Right.
And the outcomes of those 5 cases are all bad.
Yeah.
They try to remove it, it comes back, they die. I truly believe that we found Benny's cancer so early in its growth that we have a shot at very long life because of the way it was found.
Yeah. That's the Holy Spirit working right there.
I know it.
Yeah. There's no doubt. No doubt. Yeah.
We're blessed.
Yeah.
And you know what? We talk to people all the time that lose their kids, right? You've seen our podcast. I have a religiously funny podcast called The Beatitudes.
Mm-hmm.
But the only reason it's religiously funny, we are funny, we're good at this, but humor is this accessible place of entry for the person who doesn't want to talk about faith or is maybe not well catechized, maybe left the church.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also an entry point for the extremely well catechized, the very orthodox, because humor is like a neutral ground. But that doesn't stop us from going deep into all sorts of tough conversations. We have a couple of shows coming up with people who lost children in the womb and post birth, 18 days, 3 years. One that did 12 years old, they lost their, or 13 years old, lost their daughter. So when I say we're blessed, I don't mean that we're blessed simply because my son is still alive, although that is a blessing. I mean it because it's through this role as parents that we're able to have a small glimpse into the unconditional love we have for our children, our desire for them to experience good and not evil, and the part where we would sacrifice anything for them. And I think that's a glimpse into what our Heavenly Father must see in a perfect form for us.
Yeah.
And if we lost any of those kids, my prayer is that I'd still be able to sit here and tell you how blessed we are. I think that's the truth, but I haven't been there. I've said goodbye to one of them. That was real, but then he lived. And so we're blessed. We're blessed that we have faith above all, above everything.
Yeah. Yeah. We have one in heaven.
You do?
So, yeah.
Was this in the womb? Was it outside the womb?
In the womb.
And did you name your child?
Catherine. We're not, it was so early, we're not sure. It's either Catherine or Luke.
You know what? I think God puts it on your heart. And so I think it's appropriate to be able to talk to Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but
yeah.
I pray for the intercessory prayers of all of those that have gone before us, and I'll add Catherine to that as well.
Yeah. All right. So we'll move on to, so
you get the nice transition moment. How are you going to transition this?
Yeah. You're the professional.
People make fun of me for transitions all the time. It's not easy sometimes.
No. Yeah. So you co-founded an energy company called Five, and you were the chief culture officer. So why'd you take that title?
Yeah, first I'll tell you that the name Five for a company is so radical because it's just the digit 5, not even spelled out. And it was an homage to level 5 that you could reach in a culture building, in intentional culture building. I got this from the book Tribal Leadership, but this level 5 culture is transcendent. It's not even talking about competition anymore. It's talking about what's possible. It's a place where we're not just trying to protect information. We're in partnership for some greater good. It ends up very much aligning with Catholic social teachings. But knowing that we were going to start an organization where culture was paramount, and culture is really the strategy of how you do everything, that in order for us to kind of plant that flag and say culture matters, even though I was in charge of sales, strategy, marketing, recruiting, and partnerships, I took on the title of Chief Culture Officer so that everybody who ever interacted with our company would have to know that culture was important, even though culture really is everybody and everybody's responsible for it. And so that was my biggest challenge, was making sure that I was perpetuating not just that people knew, but that they were coaches to other coaches, that it was expansive beyond just anybody who had a direct connection to me. And it worked out really well. I left that organization 2 years ago It continues to go very strong as one of the best places to work, one of the fastest growing companies, one of the most innovative companies with great leadership and great technology. And it truly is built upon the foundations that you and I both enjoy so much in the vocation of the business leader. But long answer to say, when you make a title or put a spotlight on something, hopefully it's an outward symbol to people of what matters on the internal side of your organization.
Why do you think that so many businesses out there don't take culture into consideration until it's kind of a mess?
Yeah, it's almost like then all of a sudden they're trying to look for the antidote to whatever toxicity has entered their system when probably they're all along.
Yeah.
First, I think there's a weird part where we think culture is about birthdays and anniversaries and happy hours. And so we relegate culture to be somebody's side job, or hopefully you have an HR department that handles it. And that's such a misstep, because if I go back to what I just said, that culture is the strategy of how we do everything, from the very first talk of posting a job to what it's like to be interviewed by us, to be onboarded, to be trained, reprimanded, supported, celebrated, to be in partnership, to have value add and not just be a cog in the wheel, all the way to what it's like to be fired or terminated or talked about as a former employee or to quit. Like every part of how we do business with the humans that are involved inside and outside is our culture. Yet we act like because people are involved, then it must be human resources. That's just a complete misstep. I think that's a huge part of it. I think the other part is people will see companies do extremely well. Look at Whole Foods or somebody that always made culture a big deal. And they'll say, we should do that too as a strategy. And so they miss it again. They make it this thing they're trying to win points on so that they can somehow turn it into dollars and profitability and not just a way of being. And so it's a false understanding of culture, and it becomes just a buzzword. And then, of course, people bring you in and say, fix our culture. Well, I don't think that that's very easily done if you're trying to outsource it without it being an all-in mentality, that you're going to have top leaders, executives, mid-leaders, and frontline employees involved in a change of your communication, your relationship building, the norms, the unspoken norms of your organization, then also the governance or the formal rules of your organization. You need to have all of those things moving in the right direction for that flywheel to spin the other way.
So, successful company, going gangbusters, and then you decided to leave and start Undivided Life. Yeah. So how did you make that decision?
It's a total discernment. I try to tell people all the time that discernment is one of those words that we don't use enough in the corporate world because we try to separate it from spirituality. But the process I went through in that was just to start to understand that I believed in these principles. Again, I'd read about subsidiarity and solidarity and common good and justice and just wages. And I deployed those principles over and over and over. And every time I was told that you couldn't have a thriving company culture in a publicly traded company or in an energy company or in a startup or in a turnaround, it was like every version of that story I was dispelling by being involved with people who felt and worked the way I did as well. And we kept proving it. So here I was about a decade into this energy consulting company. I was working with so many leaders outside of the organization. I was coaching priests. I was helping to launch different nonprofits. And I found that I could check the box once again, that in a very greedy world of energy brokerage and consulting that is kind of corporate America at its finest, we once again changed the game and elevated the game for everybody, including our competitors. And I didn't want to be somebody who was running an energy company on the side. I wanted the people that were there to get the full focus of the leadership. And I didn't want to run from something. I wanted to run to something. So I just went on a whole process of what would it be, or what could I bring to other people if I were a consultant, if I spoke more often, even as a practitioner. Could I help to launch and lead businesses of a wide variety? And it came down to, I want to help make the world a better place through the way we do business or through the way we teach other people to do business. And not just the world a better place, but as my business partner said, if you do it right, the truth, beauty, and goodness of the way you operate, and we're still talking about businesses here for a second, can help other people to know and to encounter God by the way, not even the what. You don't even have to say what it is. You can just interact with people and with organizations in a totally different way and create that curiosity or that fertile soil that leads to moments of encounter. That's it. Pretty vague way to explain what we do, but it's conceptual at first.
Uh-huh. So when a business comes to you, deep down, what are they looking for?
What I've seen more than anything is transformation. And even a good organization, if they understand what's possible, they want to be transformed. And so we often have people who will bring us on board, not in any specific role, although there may be projects and desired outcomes tied to the engagement. But they hire us in, and we just call this product the executives down the hall, that we get to serve, and the we as a collective we, and maybe one of us is the key person, but we get to serve as executives on the teams of small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofits where they want a transformation, even some very large organizations. They want a transformation. They want the talent, the external viewpoints. They want the rigor that we bring to the table, but they know they don't have to go and do a job search looking for just the perfect candidate, because what might happen is we're going through a process and we're doing a cultural transformation with someone. And now we need to go into a strategic planning exercise. Well, maybe I've been front and center for the last 2.5 months. And during the strategic planning, another one of our executives comes in and is leading that process. And I'm still in the picture, but you're getting more of this person's time, and you're getting the output of somebody who maybe has a background in, finance or M&A, or somebody who's done a great job in building up thriving sales organizations. And so we're just this interchangeable piece when we play this executives down the hall model. That's the primary thing we bring to people. It's almost like you have a problem or an opportunity, and you don't want to take the risk of having to staff up a whole full-time employment person or team. We're a known entity. A lot of people follow our stuff or already know us. And you can bring us in on a limited engagement. We can go get the work done at a fraction of the cost. That's the primary.
Have you had a client that brought you in but couldn't swallow the pill?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. It's almost like there's people who they say they want transformation, but when you show them what it looks like, they're not ready to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
Or you tell them what it's going to take, and they realize they're better off sitting tight with what they have now. It's good enough. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Really great story. We were brought in by a client. It's a pro-life organization, 25 people here in Dallas. We did a project. We were underpaid, and at the end of the day, it wasn't clear that the advice we were giving and what we were seeing was going to matter. And so kind of my punchline at the end was, I love you guys. We're not going to do this again, though, because you need to pay us better, and you need to give us more authority in the room, because it's just not worth it for us to be a sounding board. That's just not who we are. Greg, they fast forward a year, when they let the executive director go, they offered us a 1-year contract at a good rate, and then named me as the interim executive director. And now about 20% of my work week is spent running the Catholic pro-life community of Dallas, and I have 25 employees. So they did exactly what I asked, which I think the lesson is be careful what you ask. It might come true. But it's a great example of somebody that I think they saw the writing on the wall after the first round and said, you know what, if we're going to do this, we have to go all in. We can't just check the box that we're doing work about a better strategy and a better culture. We have to really go do it. And the results, we're 3 months in, the results are phenomenal.
It works if you let it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's neat is we actually have conversations underway to use the business acumen of our combined group here to go through due diligence and an M&A view into what it would be like to take several of the other pro-life groups in town and merge them into one larger entity that has a value chain that runs straight through, that uses shared savings, that actually is expansive, that we're not trying to cut people's jobs. We actually think people's jobs could be more meaningful. They could be better suited for the thing that they're good at.
Yep.
And we are getting tremendous feedback to the point where we have an NDA and a letter of intent in place right now on a pretty large group becoming fully embedded within this larger organization. And I'll give you the punchline. If you're a benefactor, it's confusing because they all sound the same. You know what? It's more confusing if you're a woman in need of help. If you are a family in need of resources and you have 13 or 14 logos that all kind of sound the same and you have to keep reintroducing yourself, like what if we had less logos and just more impact? Yeah. And I'll go back to it. Kind of sounds like an undivided life and an undivided pro-life.
Yeah. Undivided mission.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. That's awesome. So on your LinkedIn post, you mentioned a culture of coaching.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Yeah, I think people sometimes mistake coaching to be about trying to right a wrong or about just giving critical feedback to somebody as if it's just your performance review. Where coaching to me is not the tactical aspect of how to do my job. I think that's on-the-job training. I think that's supervisory. Coaching to me is how do you help somebody to unlock and unleash their potential so that if you could help people to understand the way that they communicate, the way that they're showing up, what they're capable of, how they can be multiplicative with other people, perhaps you're unlocking breakthrough performance and breakthrough effectiveness. And that doesn't mean profits, although profits may be an outcome. It really means that this person is showing up as their best self, that they are able to contribute in the biggest way with and for others, and that they end up having a higher job satisfaction because now they're rising to challenge. They are having moments of mastery. They're having a team approach. Even when they fail or more likely succeed, they're doing it as a team sport and not as an individual contributor. The culture of coaching to me is that coaching shouldn't just be one person's job or only some external person that we can only afford to get 3 or 4 people involved with. A culture of coaching permeates the entire organization to say there are some people that are really well suited to be coaches, maybe even cross-functionally to other people. But there's also this part that says once we get the language of coaching, once we get the desire to both contribute and be contributed to, then you and I can have a coaching relationship that allows us as peers, as boss to employee or whatever, to coach in every direction using the appropriate setup, framework, understanding, timeliness to it all. And now annual reviews aren't even annual reviews. The annual review is a time for a 360 coaching look back that is just a punctuation point on something that's been building up the entire year. And as an architect for a culture of coaching, I'm not even necessary. All I did was help to set up a framework and then let it loose within an organization and build it up over time.
And that hiring culture is key to that because you got to root out the middle manager who doesn't want to be topped. Yeah. And that jealousy, that pride, and that really just hampers growth.
You can see it too culture. When you start. Yeah, sorry. When you start working with somebody like that, I will say that there's understandable baggage and roadblocks in front of people, but there's also these indicators that you can see as somebody willing to go further. Are they willing to open and expand their mind to a world of other possibilities? Or after some amount of time and a lot of grace, is it clear that this person's probably not going to get there? And that doesn't make them good or bad. It just means that at this time, they might not be ready for where we're headed, and we'll come up with a different plan for them.
Yep. What does it mean, business made human?
Yeah, what's funny? I was flipping back through the vocation of the business leader. It's my favorite document. I have versions of it all over the office. Everybody here has read it. And I was thinking about this because, it talks about living an undivided life on the very, very first page. And then it starts talking about where does human leadership come in? And it was funny. I got to read this to you because this hit me right before we went on air together. this paragraph towards the beginning says, without guiding principles and virtuous leadership, business can be places in which expediency displaces justice, power corrupts wisdom, technical instruments are detached from human dignity, and self-interest marginalizes the common good. And all of us have examples, even in the best organizations. Go to Southwest Airlines. They're known for their culture. I guarantee there's places where expediency got in the way of justice or power corrupted wisdom and so on. And so business made human is our quick and easy tagline to remind ourselves every business is a human business. And when we act that way and we're intentional about the words, the relationships, the structures, the filters by which we make decisions, then we can say that because our organization exists, hopefully we're making people better humans and giving them more dignity than if we didn't. And they're going home to spouses and kids and parents and communities and churches, showing up differently because their work formed them. Like it was part of making them who they are. It's actually why work exists, and not that work somehow exists to make money, to make, profit for individuals or profit for organizations. That should be just an outcome, and we should have a truly human approach. Quite honestly, most people are used to being in organizations where they don't feel like a human, or they have bosses who strip away humanity. And you can feel those effects. It ends up being that people quit bosses, not even companies.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So what would you say is the vocation of the business leader?
Yeah. To me, the vocation of the business leader is to find out why work exists. Mm-hmm. And when you realize that work, when done to the best of our abilities, is a way to glorify God, to be formed, and to grow in human dignity, then it doesn't matter what the outcome is of a project or an annual budget or even a business in its totality. It matters how are we positively or negatively forming and impacting the human beings involved. Mm-hmm. And so I think the vocation of the business leader is to be first and foremost human-centric, knowing that if we do that to the best of our ability, the outcomes of whatever service or product we're making will likely be good. And mm-hmm. even if it's not, then that's where we should be. That there's a natural outcome to doing business the right way mm-hmm. that isn't greedy or selfish or demoralizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So switching gears, so you've been a radio show host for 8 years?
8 years, yeah, that's crazy.
Undivided intention.
Yep.
So tell us about that.
So this is a neat one. About, how long ago would this be? 8.5 years ago, I went on and did an interview on a radio show. Actually, back up one step. I was giving a talk in Houston. The next day I'm at Mass, and I turned to my wife and I said, I think I'm supposed to be talking a lot more in public about being faith forward and not just occasionally where I'm doing all these leadership and innovation talks. She goes, great. I'll pray that you don't have to spend too many overnights away from the family. I said, great. The next week, the Catholic radio station asked if I wanted to be on the radio. I went and did an interview. After that, they asked me if I wanted to have my own show. And then they told me they moved, and they moved into the office next door to mine. We shared a parking lot, and they gave me a pilot, and I named it Undivided Intention and said we were going to talk about living our faith at the forefront of everything we do in all walks of life. We'd always have guests on there. And the show has been enough of a hit that here we are 8 years later. And even though I've moved and they've moved, it's still a 1-minute drive from this office to my live radio show. And so once a month for 8 years, I talked to several thousand of my dear friends on air and have interviewed some of the most fascinating guests. In fact, I added a co-host 4 years ago, and our very first guest that we talked to was my friend who had just been put on hospice and died 10 months later from a brain tumor. And it was so fascinating to talk to somebody who was crossing over into the next life and had moments of being completely lucid and then moments of, you could tell that he was drifting into something else, and did it with us on air, but still was in this beautiful combination of funny and authentic, but also raw and emotional. And to me, that epitomized who I want to be in all my relationships, which is I want to be real with people. It doesn't mean we have to tell people every little detail of our lives, but I'm also not going to try to turn sadness into something different, or I'm not going to shy away from difficult conversations. If that's what God wants us to talk about right now, then I'm ready for it. But the radio is, it's one of those things that I would call, I love doing it. And I also see it as a service to the greater church, right? Younger people I'm younger, I have this big gray beard, but younger people talking about some fresh concepts, because I think sometimes Catholic radio gets a bad rap for being the same 20 people talking across the airwaves.
Right. So how did the Beatitudes come about?
Yeah.
Which is a great podcast.
Thank you. We were about 2 years into the radio show, and they asked if we would ever want to do our own, I guess, national radio program through the Guadalupe Radio Network. And when we sat down, I was with my co-host, Paul Kolker. We brainstormed out some ideas on a show that would have different kind of segments to it, but also have the same nature of humor and holiness. And what we pitched was called the Beatitudes. And they said the Guadalupe Radio Network is not ready for the Beatitudes. They're pushing it. And I said, okay, no problem. When we started the new business, Undivided Life, I built out, we're in the studio right now. If we backed up, there's 3 cameras, there's lights everywhere that I forgot to turn on. And there's a whole set in here. And this room that we're in is purely just for podcasting with you. We have an online video series called Culture Foundations that people take our classes. And then the podcast, the Beatitudes. I said, look, if we have all this equipment and there's stuff everywhere, why don't we build out the right studio? We can just launch this program. And then I could see this combination of taking my on-air co-host, Paul Kolker, my business partner, Nick Besner, and then myself and one guest. And I was like, oh, God ordained this. I can just see the way this is going to play out. And it is so awesome. 0 prep. We don't have any bad language, no innuendos, no foul anything. So it's a family-friendly show where we will talk about any single topic with some sort of levity, but also this leaven of bringing people to know and understand faith and Christ and redemption and forgiveness and healing and eternity, while also being goofballs that are self-deprecating, that are, like I called it, a baptized stream of consciousness almost, that we're just enjoying being people together, and other people can listen in or they can watch on the video version.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And we've been on big stages. We did the National Eucharistic Congress, the Beatitudes. We were only about 15 months old, and now we got invited to be at Seek in Salt Lake City for January of 2024. We'll be one of the 9 podcasts on that stage.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. What advice would you have for a Catholic professional out there that is living a divided life?
Yeah, that's most of them, right? So I would say that first and foremost, we got to ask ourselves, what's going to happen at the end of our careers from this divided life approach that we're going to be proud of? Like, where would we ever sit back and say, I'm so grateful that I put this part of my life on hold? Or when, for a man out there, when everybody was sitting around talking bad about their wife and kids, I'm so grateful that I joined in with some meaningless banter. Or that when people asked what I was leaving to go to, I told them some little makeshift excuse, and instead of explaining that I was headed over to go to reconciliation, or that I was headed to Mass because it was a feast day, like, what did that do for us? And so if we can not live in the future regret, but live in the present opportunity to make changes, they don't have to be drastic. They just need to be incremental so that you can see the door open up, right? Let me give you like one that I thought was so funny when I was first on this journey, because I lived a very divided life, right? Business Jeff, and then Jeff that would go to the Holy Land. I can remember starting to say happy holidays to people, but I didn't mean that. I meant Merry Christmas, right? And so as dumb as it was, that Merry Christmas is not the most evangelical thing I could do as a Catholic man, it opened a door for me that I realized I was comfortable saying Merry Christmas, and that people who didn't celebrate Christmas weren't actually offended. Like,
no.
That's not real.
Yeah.
Like, thank you for wishing me that. It's like if I said, God bless you, most people aren't like, how dare you? Like, and so it just gave me these small incremental moments of knowing that I wasn't going to be chastised for believing in God. And then what's come to be true is the more I actually know my faith, or the more that I allow the love of Christ to inform my decisions, the more other people respect those decisions, even if they're Muslim, Jewish, a Protestant, a non-believer,
Yep.
because they at least see that I believe something, that I'm
Yep.
standing for something I believe in, and not in a toxic, caustic way, but in it's what drives me. There's a great, great freedom that comes from not having to figure out which hat I'm wearing, or what's my relationship going to be like with Greg versus with so-and-so.
Right.
Just going to be me. It's why you and I didn't prepare for this podcast. Like, press record.
Mhm.
Let's have a conversation. It's the
Yeah.
exact conversation I have with you over dinner. You just wouldn't be wearing headphones.
Maybe.
Well, maybe. Isn't it funny? I like going on people's podcasts and asking them questions, because a lot of times the host isn't ready to be in the moment of sharing, right? But
Yeah.
that's how real dialogue goes. So
Yeah.
I'm always kind of playing it by ear on, what's the best way to also engage you, because I want people to know you too. You're an awesome man.
Oh, well, thank you. So, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to talk about?
I think something I would just reiterate to people is, if you think about this idea of faith in work, right? That we're supposed to be, by the business books and by our mentors, we're supposed to be bifurcated and check it at the door. It becomes so soul crushing that I think it starts to change who we are and wear us down. And I just want to encourage people to understand that nobody can stop you from being joyful, even in a bad culture. No one can stop you from putting your heart in Christ, where you can truly rest and be joyful. And no one can stop you from caring enough about other people to actually pray for them. It doesn't mean they have to always know that you're praying for them, but telling somebody that you're going to pray for them versus actually just praying for people is a big difference. And then one step further, asking people what I can pray for with you, or even when you get to the comfort level that you have to build up to, praying with people. Can we pray about that now? I think it unleashes the part that we live in a spiritual world that has some physical elements, not a physical world that has some spiritual elements. And so, look, we get to do this for a little while, and then we're on to some sort of an eternity. And every step we take should be taking us closer to the one we want and further from the one we don't want.
Well,
Yeah.
We'll end it there. So thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks, Craig. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us today in the Vocation Business Leader Podcast. I hope you found inspiration as we explore the powerful union of faith and business. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, share, like, and share it with others. May God bless you. See you next time. Bye.